Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning as part of our Dion Leadership webinar series. Today, we are talking on the topic of developing an extraordinary C-suite team. I have Steve Dion, our founder and CEO of Dion Leadership, with us today, as well as Dr. Mike Genord, the president and CEO of Health Alliance Plan, and Vicki Walker, who is one of our executive coaches and consultants with Dion Leadership.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our Dion Leadership webinar series today. And thank you, Dr. Genord and Vicki, for spending an hour with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the meat of our subject here, I just want to do a quick set of introductions and kind of level set how we're going to spend our hour today. As you heard, Dr. Genord is the Executive Vice President of Henry Ford Health and the CEO and President of Health Alliance Plans. He's been in this role since 2020, which is about the time we started to work on team development. And for those of you that don't know, Dr. Genord is also a board certified in obstetrics and gynecology, and he managed a private practice for 17 years before doing this work here, and I also spent some time at Beaumont and the United Physicians Group. And then Vicki, in terms of her background, Vicki and I have worked together for, I'm counting Vicki, I think 8 years and running, maybe longer than that. Vicki's an executive coach, team facilitator, and leadership development consultant. And before joining us and doing this work, she held senior level HR roles in some pretty large progressive organizations, including Ernst & Young, Plex Systems, which is also Rockwell Automation, ADP, Meritor, and United Technologies. So we have a lot of years of experience of leadership development, team development, and executive development here in our virtual room today, and looking forward to unpacking that in the context of executive team development. And we don't always get a chance to have an opportunity within our HR community to be joined by a line leader who's running these programs. So today, to me, is a really exciting time because we have a lot of HROD people that bring a different bent to this. So I'm looking forward to asking Dr. Genord to share his experience as a leader so you as a community can understand what the impact is for the line leader when you sponsor an initiative like that. So let's dig right in. Mike, would you like to talk a little bit about HAP, and we can just do a little bit of level setting for those of you that don't know the organization?
Yeah, welcome, Steve. And again, thanks for having me. You know, Henry Ford's an organization that has deep community roots for over 100 years, and Health Alliance Plan has been its plan for the last 60 years. And we were founded by the union back in 1960, really to bring competition in the market to some of the major competitors. We have about 430,000 members, $2.4 billion in revenue of insurance dollars we manage here. And about 30% of those members solely see Henry Ford doctors, but that means 70% are seeing physicians and provider systems across the state of Michigan, have over 50,000 physicians in our network, and really are a regional presence across the entire lower peninsula of Michigan. But really excited to be here. We have about 1,000 employees here within Health Alliance Plan.
Wonderful. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about the organization as we talk through the team development effort. And then for those of you that don't know Dion Leadership, as a quick introduction, we are a leadership and organizational development consulting business, really founded on this notion of creating conditions where employees can start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And we primarily do work in the executive coaching space, management training space, team development space, which is really what we're unpacking here today, and organizational culture, which really all three of those create culture in organizations. And we've just been delighted to have a strong partnership and working really through all of these modalities with Health Alliance Plans and with many of our clients. And for those of you that don't know, we do a lot of work in healthcare and also a lot of manufacturing organizations, but big, complicated places that have senior leadership teams. So that's really how this work kind of came together today, is helping a team create conditions where they can create a higher performing organization. And we do believe that that starts at the top of the house. So let's get into the meat of the subject here. When we scoped this work and Mike selected Vicki to be his leadership coach for this effort, I remember one of the things that came up in our first conversation was the notion that every time a new member joins, we are now a new team. And I think that was your direct quote, Mike. So can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about your view of executive team development, why you wanted to do this, and kind of how this program came to be?
Yeah. So first, I think you mentioned, choosing Vicki, and I do think that was a very intentional process. As Steve, you served several people for us to interview and think about, and really finding the right match for the team. And this quote really came as Vicki and I began to work with the team and seeing traction. We also had some new members join the team, and I failed when that happened to really help position the team for success and realize that the dynamics of the team were going to change. And in fact, we lost a team member in that process. And as much as we kind of said that person wasn't a good fit for the team, I reminded the team we probably weren't a good fit and a welcoming body. And we didn't go back to the work that we committed to with Vicki and realized that the team dynamics has changed. And so we really were very intentional when we brought the next new member for Vicki to spend time with us to realize that all the great work, and regardless of how functioning you are, when you bring new people in your family, your teams, whatever, the dynamic does change. And that dynamic is often things we're looking for in culture: diversity of thought, diversity of thinking. And most people, when they come into C-levels, they're A-driven, they want to make big impacts. And sometimes, and we saw it, Vicki and I, when new people came in and had that, the other team, the existing, said, whoa, who are you to this new team? We got this under control. Abrasion started to happen. So I think that, one, I think you really have to be cognizant of that. And I think you'll hear from Vicki and I, this is not one and done. This is something, I grew up in sports. I grew up as a physician. Teams practice all the time. Super Bowl football teams, Super Bowl basketball teams, great symphonies. They never say we're great, we stop practicing. We actually commit to practicing all the time. And this was a really important learning from me when I lost a great member to the team, because I don't think we did the work at the forefront. And this, leadership is a team sport. And I learned that early on, like I said, and I played football. I know people probably laughed, sure you did. But the reality of it is I was a quarterback, but I realized the diversity of the team, whether you're a lineman, a running back, a wide receiver, everyone has a different perspective on the team. They see the field from a different angle. They bring a different skill set. In the operating venue, when I'm in the operating venue, the anesthesiologist, the nurse anesthetist, the nurse, the circulating, they all are empowered in a team, but you have to be intentional and you have to practice. You have to make it a safe, psychologically safe place for people in an operating, to say the surgeon who, comes in with some informal power to say, hold it, put the knife down, or hold it, we need to stop, hold it, we need to do it. And so we really believe that practice and bringing someone on like Vicki and being very clear to my team, it's not because I think we have a problem. I believe that we need to continue to do this as part of being a great team.
So at the moment, what I'm hearing you say is there really wasn't a specific problem with your team. You just knew that to be a better organization, we needed to have the capabilities to work better across functions. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think Vicki has been a great counselor to me. Is there's a little bit of imposter syndrome getting my first C-suite role that, this I had to learn as well. And having a team coach and having someone guide the team, I think really was something I felt I needed personally for my safety cloth of doing right and growing as a leader. But I really believe, team dynamics. And, Vicki, you may want to share a little bit about my initial conversations regarding how this isn't a one and done. And I wasn't looking because we had a problem. I was looking because I was a new leader and wanted to have a great team.
Yeah, and I'll chime in a little bit here, Mike. So there was a couple of things that were really important, and I'll start by saying, 4 years later, Mike is clearly now the GOAT of leadership. So he can't claim that imposter syndrome anymore. He's truly the GOAT and has a phenomenal team. They're my dream team to work with. So they challenge me because they're not easy to come up with things to help them get better. But just like Mike mentioned, I grew up in sports also and have always functioned well in teams and prefer that versus individual. And so the fact that I feel like an extension of his team makes it even that much more powerful, that I can truly get to know everybody on the team and truly bring them the support that they need to fine tune from, like, if you think of professional athletes, they're already really good at what they do, but they have trainers and coaches to help them be the best. And that's kind of how we view this with the team. And I will also say that I was pleasantly surprised when I engaged on with Mike and the team was right when COVID hit. And a lot of leaders stepped back and organizations stepped back and said, we're going to put it on hold for right now. We're going to wait it out the 3 months, we thought at first. And we'll just, we'll pick it back up after COVID is done. And Mike never did that. He said, nope, let's redesign. We'll do virtual for as long as we need to. And when we can come back in person, we will. And that was a great sign of a true leader who plowed through it, basically, and in the COVID scenario where a lot of other leaders and organizations stepped back.
So when we first set this up, I know one of the things that we'd like to do as an organization is to measure where the team is and not just get in a room and start talking, but give them a perspective using a model or approach of when we talk about teams, what do they do? Why is trust important? What does that look like? So Vicki, can you talk a little bit about the assessment that you conducted first to get this team going?
Sure. So one of the first things we did with the team was to build a foundation with the 5 behaviors. So for those of you who are familiar with 5 behaviors, you recognize this pyramid. And that was one of the key components or tenets that we built this foundation on. We also used work of leaders, but for our purposes here today, we'll talk a little bit about the team assessment on the 5 behaviors. So this was the initial assessment that we did back in 2020. And these are the results that came through. And this is actually a great result to work with. There's no red. We have some teams that have a little more red and maybe no green. So we didn't necessarily rest on our laurels then, though. We said, okay, so how do we be all green? That's the goal. And how are we sure that we are truthful in that? So we vetted through these results and we took each piece of the pyramid and worked our way up. And we vetted through, okay, this is what the survey came out, but let's dig deep and say, is this really true? Is this where we are? Where are the challenges? Where are the opportunities? We're a great team, obviously, to start with. How do we get to be the best, for example? And so this is what we started. We worked through a variety of, at the time, because everything was virtual, we worked through virtual workshops, incorporating in activities and learning. So it was a dual role of building trust, really understanding what healthy and productive conflict looks like. What is the commitment? And so if you think about the 5 behaviors, this is building upon the next as you go up the tiers. And so how are we green and commitment, yet yellow and conflict and trust? And what does that mean? So we dug into some of that of, well, we're committed to the end result and very focused, and that team never wavers on that. However, there's other components that need to take a back step and build those up before we really are going to be the best at what we do and the best at as a team. And same goes for accountability. That slipped back a little bit in yellow. And again, results are green. And so we identified, what do those things mean that we're green in a couple, but there's intermittent steps in between that we're not fully effective with. And we dug into that deeper than, maybe a oversight of 5 behaviors. We dug into that really deep and what that means, and having those discussions.
So Mike, when you said to your team that you wanted to do this, what was their experience? What did they say? Yeah, whatever, how long, or I got work to do, or this is great, what was the initial reaction?
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, people bring their own biases and their own past histories with this. And A few of my more senior leaders, I got the eye roll, like we're really going to spend a whole day and do whole day seminars on this. And then when I said it wasn't just this one and done, this was something I'm committed to every year. We will spend at least a couple days in that year offsite working with Vicki. At the time, I said a team coach. But I would say that, and we'll hear more about this later in the presentation, was we see everyone come around and really engage and lead into this. And the vast majority of my team have reached out and used Vicki as their own individual coach. And I think that's a testament to, as they dove into this, they realized, Steve, that there was structure around this, that this really did make a difference. And guess what? They could improve and they could work through some things that they had brought from other positions or other jobs or biases they have dealing with conflict or trust, or how do I hold my colleague accountable, and really work with Vicki privately on those things. So I really believe there was a group of skeptics within it. There was people who love this work. Heck yes, I want to do this all day, love doing these psychological and talking. But I think right now we are in a really good place that even those skeptics really lean in and put time and effort into this.
Yeah. Well, and you're signaling that each leader is not on an island being able to just run their function the way they want by saying, I'm going to do this as a regular process. It says, be on board. This is running a company is a team sport, as you said.
Yeah.
So we get all the voices in the room. I know Vicki did one-on-one interviews with people. This is another, this is kind of a piece of the 30-some page report that we got out of this diagnostic assessment. This was a bit of the starting point. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what this told you as a starting point?
Yeah, so this was when we started working in the area of healthy and productive conflict. And while you saw that that was yellow, which means they've got some really good things going, they also have some things that they should work on to be better. And so when we looked at some of the data in this, in the 5 behaviors report, we looked at, what are those things? Because you get some skills on healthy and productive conflict, and the team was already working with those. We had a workshop, a virtual workshop on that. This is a level down. This is being vulnerable with each other and talking about what's truly acceptable for me as a human being. And so those aren't things that necessarily you just want to jump into the room and start talking about. And so in order to scratch well beneath the surface of healthy and productive conflict and what does that look like, we needed to look deeper into, how many team members find something unacceptable? How many find it tolerable? How many find it perfectly acceptable? And then it tells you the number of team members that admit they do this at work. So as you can see, if you look at this chart, there are some things that were happening that half the team felt, was really unacceptable or less than preferable, if you will. And so this really helped us go into a dialogue. And this would be where knowing the team, having a trust with the team. So some of that one-on-one interviews that I conducted is twofold. It's my ability to build a relationship and trust with individual team members as individuals before we jump into teamwork. And so that does that for our relationship. It also helps me uncover some things that maybe didn't come out in a survey, they didn't fit a question, or they didn't know how to answer there, and it's easier to talk live about it. So it helped me truly understand some of the things below the surface as well. And so we would go we'd have some somewhat standard, although HAP never lets me be standard. Everything is tailored for them. So when I say somewhat standard, we would do somewhat standard content in workshops. This would allow us to go kind of offline, if you will, right? And go deeper into what is acceptable, how do we set these as team norms, and how do you make sure you hold each other accountable for what you've agreed to is acceptable. And it goes off a little bit of that, for those of you who are familiar with Patrick Lencioni's kind of conflict continuum. And he says, all the way down here is no conflict, everything's great. And some people may recognize that if you're in Michigan, as Michigan nice. I heard once Canada said, then Canada's way over on the left side of Michigan nice. And that's what that is. And you go all the way to the right, and that is just, I call it raw meat out on the table in a bunch of bowls. So that's kind of your visual. And what you want to do is get right to the middle, right up to that middle point that is right between Michigan nice or wherever you are nice and unacceptable. And sometimes you may cross the line and go into that less than preferable or unacceptable category, but your team is strong enough to recover for that. And then you go back, and that makes you a stronger team. So we did a lot of work in that space with this data as well.
Yeah, I would just comment on this, Steve, because I think this was a really important discussion, because some people say, oh, you got a thin-skinned team using strong language, people get upset or raising your voice. But when you really dive into it, it wasn't being passionate about your position. It was being passionate or directed towards someone, and a comment was bad, or using strong language was okay in a certain thing. But if you're directing it at an individual or at an idea that someone put forth, that was the unacceptable part. So I think Vicki made a very good point there. This really taught us how to get to that middle between unacceptable and acceptable. And if you go over, that's okay. We talked about this, and how do you get back? There's a level of a trust and a level of what we said was acceptable to get those results. Because we also recognize if we didn't go to the unacceptable every now and then, we probably weren't pushing the team. We weren't having the right in the most difficult conversations. We are avoiding it. So I think this workshop, I thought, was one of the most enlightening, because people got to talk more why it was unacceptable. And then you could say, okay, how do we make passion be acceptable in a conflict? How do we make strong language be acceptable in a strong concept? So I think this was a really rewarding thing. And then I would say, I think the honesty part of the number of team members who admit they're doing, even when they say it was unacceptable, you see they were doing it. So I think this was again a level of trust, vulnerability, and honesty among the team that can say, yeah, I don't like it, and guess what, I do it too, so how do we get better as a team? So I really enjoyed that.
So at that time in 2020, can you remember back to maybe some business decisions, if you're running this organization, that were happening that you thought, yeah, I can see how we're maybe not being optimal in the way in which we're running and governing this business, and and then you can see it sort of show up in this data?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the triangle, you don't have to go back there, but the accountability was a little yellow. I think people would say that we are a type A team. We push fast. We have big goals. But, maybe we're not disciplined enough with dashboards and really holding self accountable on a regular basis. And when you do that, you also have to go to the ability to have conflict around that. Like, we were supposed to get here, and we're jumping ahead, and we're not. And so a lot of our DISC profiles say, a lot of us aren't process. We're just go, go, go. Let's get the results. And there's few of us that say, wait, time out. Can we have a little process here so all of us can come along? So I think that the work that we did in that space showed that even though we all want to get somewhere really quick and we want to be successful, we have to take some time to slow down and measure ourselves incrementally along that way, and stop and have those intentional conversations. We were actually offsite at a speakeasy doing our last offsite, and the name of the speakeasy is Hemingway's. Those of you in Rochester may know that. And that's our code word now. If someone isn't being heard, or felt like we crossed a line, or something was shared and people just didn't listen, anyone who just says Hemingway, and it makes all of us stop and say, okay, let's pause, let's dive into what just happened here. So I think these were really important exercises that Vicki led us through.
Steve, if you go back to the next slide, I'm going to add on to that. We must have telekinetic powers going on between us, because I was going to comment on something Mike just commented on, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit. So the right side of this, we talked about the conflict on the left side of the slide. To the right side of the slide, what was really interesting, and we also pulled in the work of leaders work, for those of you who are familiar with that. And it was funny a little bit. At the beginning, with the team as we had in 2020, we realized that really no one on the team, looking at their DISC styles and their work of leader styles, nobody really loved process or structure or anything that felt like it was going to slow the team down. there really wasn't anybody on the team. Normally you find someone on the team, a couple people, and you say, okay, you guys are really good at that. We need you to check us and make sure that we're putting these processes and structures in place so that we don't get down the line into execution and find out people didn't buy in. That buy-in was really critical. And so, we weekly identified, well, somebody has those tendencies on the team. We'll just give him that job, which was a little unfair on a, I think, 12 or 13 person team at the time. I will tell you what's nice now, and we continue to use this as a foundation and go back. As the team has evolved, you have a few more people that are actually really good at process and structure. And so they recognize when it's not happening, when it needs to slow down. And we've now given them the language to have the voice to speak up and say that, so that they don't skip all that stuff that happens in kind of that alignment piece and skip right to execution and then find out down the road that they missed the buy-in piece. So that's a critical component that we continue to revisit as we go through and have gone through for the past 4 years.
Great observations. And I think this illustrates also that for those organizations that are out there that think that team development is really team building and it's just a nice, fun day to sort of break the ice and it's squishy, that this is showing that true team development is about understanding what the team needs to do day to day. Do they have the right members to do it? How to behave in a way that's consistent with that? It's a very business oriented activity to drive business outcomes. And so that's maybe a motivating force for why organizations should spend a couple of days, as Mike mentioned, to be outside of the work so that when you're in the work, you're more effective at it all those other days of the week. By the way, we will have some time at the end here to answer any questions as well. So feel free to use the chat or Q&A feature if you guys have any questions. So moving forward, the other thing that distinguishes between, a kind of a one and done team building event and really team development are the different components that we brought into this program. So we want to speak to each of these. So we've spoken a bit about team development sessions. So getting the team together for sometimes people go to 2-day offsites and go away. They might do a day, they might do a half day, but there's work governed in the team. The other pieces that were brought to the table here to really infuse deep thinking were individual leadership coaching, also training within the team development session. So we have distinguished between working with the team in structured dialogue and problem solving to actually saying, maybe we're not so great at this and we need some training ourselves as well. And rather than going to like an open enrollment training class, like it unpacks very differently when it's a group of people that work together every day talking about how we might use this model. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As I mentioned, individual coaching with each individual leader, and then just building in right up front some dyads or small group time that if you're really going to go into this, having that team coach say, there might be a rub between these two people that have to work together a lot, or this offshoot. It doesn't belong in the full team session, but allow for time to honor that those conversations need to happen. Dialogue needs to occur, commitments need to be made between people. And then all of that's happening with some kind of ongoing support and governance and kind of understanding, where is this going? What do we need to do next? So we didn't build a 5-year plan that says, this is exactly what we're going to do on session 14. So we had to get together regularly and go, okay, we pushed here, we thought here, what does this next piece look like? So let's stop here and kind of spend a few more minutes on maybe the what type of training that we did and the individual coaching and dyads and how important was that, and maybe give the audience a kind of a flavor for what that looked like.
Sure, I can start. So I'm going to, it's hard for me to look at this in a linear fashion because it's really just all kind of lumped together. But let me break out the left side from the right side because that might make more sense. So one thing, and it's interesting, I have a great friend who is also in Dion Leadership, and she's phenomenal at delivering training out to hundreds of new managers and repeat and run through a whole organization, and she loves it. I love working with intact teams over years because I like to develop that relationship with them, get to truly know them, understand what their business needs are, and work with them as an extension of their team. So that's kind of a little bit of a difference of maybe leadership training and what we do here with a team. So we'll have these team development sessions. And like I said, HAP always challenges me because the team is so high functioning and high intellect. And there's not a whole lot of new ideas I can bring to them. And they say, wow, I've never heard this before. So I have to tailor things that's truly to their level that they're going to find value in. And sometimes I may have one-on-one discussions up front with people to truly get under what that looks like and what would be beneficial, and then design the right custom tailored approach. So the team development sessions and the leadership training kind of go hand in hand. We continue to have that foundation of kind of the 5 behaviors, those parts in the pyramid, as well as work of leaders and how we're functioning at that high level. And we build that foundation and we integrate everything that we learn and do thereafter, so that if you think about it, the early work was building the foundation and skills, so the muscles, if you will. And our work now is so custom tailored to the needs of the team and whatever they're dealing with, both from an internal and external environment. So if you think about that, it's really flexing those muscles and using those muscles and building them up. So that's kind of what we do in that combination of the two things. If we look
Can
at
I comment there real quick, Vicki? Because
please.
I think it's so clear, and I think Steve alluded to it and Vicki alluded to it. This wasn't a 5-year grand plan of we were going to do X, Y, and Z. Vicki and I have often conversations, and these number 1 and 2, post-pandemic, when we were coming out, a lot of financial pressures on the insurance industry and being partner. So me and Vicki talked, we needed some resilient training, and how do leaders lead through resiliency, and how do they re-energize themselves, and how do they not let bad behaviors creep in. And then at the end of 2023, we did some partnerships and reorganizations and had a significant reduction in force, reorganization, and we saw some of the trust erode, and we saw some bad behaviors starting to come out when the leadership was so stressed. So when we did our spring one this year, we went head on in that. And so what I would say in these first 2 boxes, as you embrace this type of thing, it really is important for Vicki and I to spend time, and Vicki spending time with others, like what behaviors are happening? What are people feeling today? So I think that's really key in these first 2 boxes.
And I'll mention one other thing that is not always the case with intact teams. I have a great relationship, obviously, with Mike, and I can talk to him about, hey, for this particular offsite retreat, I need you to be the leader at the beginning and the leader at the end, maybe at lunch if you see fit. But for the rest of the time, I need you to be a team member. And so a lot of times leaders have a hard time pivoting into those 2 roles. And I've even had some leaders that say, well, I'll just step out of the room then for that part. Mike and I talk about that for every workshop, every retreat that we do. We talk about what is his role, when is his role this, when does it pivot to this, which hat is he wearing when? And so that's kind of a key component. And we'll tell the team, so it's not secret. We tell the team that, hey, for this time, he's in your breakout session. He's one of your peers. He's not the leader in this case. And so treat it that way. And so it's not like it's a secret between Mike and I. It's something that we disclose to the whole team. And so we identify when those times are and where he needs to pivot and where I need him as a leader, where I need him as a team member, and it works very well. And the rest of the team, true to Mike's leadership style that is so trusting and engaging, they're good with it. They don't think there's an ulterior motive happening, like any of those other things that may happen with some teams. That doesn't happen, and this works very effectively.
Let's talk about the individual coaching and the dyad side then, Vicki.
Yeah. So on that, it's interesting. There's a couple of things that I do. So Mike and I we talk through this, and we're very intentional that every time, and he mentioned it briefly in the beginning, every time that a new team member joins, it's a new team. Whereas a lot of teams, a new team member joins and it may be, hey, we need to onboard this person or integrate this person into the team. We look at that a little bit differently here. We say, okay, we can integrate, but we also need to make sure that the whole team knows a new person is joining, it's a new team. And so there's some level setting that needs to happen, and some behaviors, I guess, that on both sides that they need to feel confident in. So I spend time with each new member as they come on, whether it's they were promoted from internal, whether they came in from the outside, wherever. And I catch them kind of up to speed on where we've been as a team, what kind of learning and development, what our workshops have looked like, and give them some flavor into that as best I can. We also will launch a DISC survey for them. We'll launch a work of leader survey so that they can have the same data as the rest of the team, because we continue to revisit those things as foundational components as we go. And we don't want anybody to feel left out. So we do that as a norm every time we're bringing somebody new into the team. And that seems to go very well. They don't feel like they're just the one new person being assimilated into a team that already has a culture. They have the understanding that they can change the culture. It's a new team when they join. So on top of that, I also offer, and Mike has offered up to the team, that anybody can get an individual coach, whether that's, hey, I need a few coaching sessions, I think, to get myself up to speed and feet under me if I'm a new person, or somebody who's been there since the beginning when we started our work together that says, you know, I think I could use a coach for a little bit. So they could be short, like snippets of coaching, maybe a few sessions. Sometimes it can be ongoing as needed or ad hoc. So I'm available to the team for that. And then there's some that come on and they want a full-blown, you know, leadership development integrating into the new role. So not the team, but the new role. And that's a bigger coaching package. So we do all of those things depending on the needs. Again, those are custom tailored for the team members. One of the things that I do talk with them about, because people may be wondering, how do you coach Mike and also coach his direct reports and also are the team coach? Like, doesn't that get all a little gray and fuzzy? And I make it perfectly clear. We have this discussion up front of how I compartmentalize those relationships, how I will not breach confidentiality no matter what. I like to tell people, I don't care who pays me, you're my client regardless. And so it's one of those things that it's truly level setting up front of how I separate those things, and where sometimes my knowledge of the overall team may be helpful for them also. And then they have the decision to choose. They can choose me to do some coaching with, they can choose another coach. So we're very clear about all of that. Mike's intentional about their leadership development, whether that's with me or whether that's with another coach. And we appreciate that so that they understand how that all works. And then sometimes, Steve, you mentioned, we may have a particular rub situationally with a couple members of the team. A lot of times it stems from a misunderstanding that kind of works its way up to now there's some challenge within a couple team members that's apparent to the rest of the team. And it's not something the rest of the team wants, and it's not something a couple individuals want. And so we may pull offline then and say, hey, let's do a little dyad coaching. And sometimes it's with 3 people, sometimes it's with 2 people. It's really tailored to the needs of the team, and pull them back a little bit to identify where's this have to go down? Is it in the trust stage and we're going to work our way back up? Is it helpful to have a facilitator, which is my role, in those discussions? I do give them pre-work, them coming into the sessions. I have expectations of what I want them to talk about in the sessions. And then we have expectations coming out of those of what we expect them to have achieved or what we hope for them to achieve. And we ask their input for that. And those are really beneficial. They're beneficial not only for the people who partake in the dyad coaching, they're beneficial for the whole rest of the team because it makes the rest of the team uncomfortable when there's something between a couple team members. And so we say dyad coaching is kind of for the individuals participating in it, but it's really for the whole team because it eliminates that little thing that was happening within the team that affected the whole team.
So Mike, do you have something that you could share that kind of how this all came together with looking at all four of these and some insights about, when did you decide, this, like, when do you engage as the leader outside of the team session? When do you say, I think Vicki should do this and keep me out of it? And is there some, thread throughout the few years of how this has all come together that you have any insights on? So kind of two questions in there.
Yeah, I would say one, going back to like, none of this was pre-planned. It was being vulnerable, reacting to the situation as it was unfolding. So individual coaching, it was someone uncomfortable in the team. You saw it and they would say to me like, I really X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, everyone has availability, individual coaching, and certainly Vicki is open to you. I, assure you, I never hear of individual coaching beyond if she does a stakeholder, interview at the beginning of what you're looking for in the leader, but and tell them they can also choose other leaders. Dyad coaching, isn't anything I thought of at the beginning, but you would see this small fester cancer coming in the team, and it was really, I was hearing about it because one leader was coming to me saying X, the other leader is, and I was trying to tell them, get in the room. This is your problem to solve. You need to hold each other accountable. I don't wear stripes. I'm not the referee. But I then realized maybe they didn't have the skill set to do it, even though the work we were doing. And so the suggestion usually went to the individual, you work with Vicki. Why don't you ask Vicki about this? And maybe she can introduce some dyad coaching or some other process to help you deal with it. And it really was liberating to them because they're like, oh, wow, I can do this privately and you don't even know it. Like the two of us can get in a room with Vicki and call you bad names or whatever the case may be, but work to solve a problem. Because when they came to me, Steve, I said, you're not bringing your best self to the team right now because of this. So go solve that because you're such an incredible leader. And then I remind them that I have an individual coach because I get in funks and I get in bad times and I get in situations where I'm like, Vicki, I need an hour of your time. And it allows me also to work through a very safe environment. So I think first emulate that behavior myself, that sometimes I need it, but then really being vulnerable and telling them they need to be vulnerable and openness to work on it.
Let me also share here that I think the world and know your HR team too. Mark, I've known him for a long time. Mm-hmm. Incredible VP of HR, Cindy, an OD person. Mm-hmm. This is working, within your HR community, but separate than that. And I think we figured out a great way for the HR mm-hmm. team to not feel threatened by this, or I need to be in the room, or I need to play a different role. And I raise that to say, I know when we work with other organizations, I think they think we should be the ones in the room doing this. And I think it's a testament to your team and how we talk with them separately. I mean, we could have had Mark on this and he would have added a lot of value to this as well. So could you talk a little bit about kind of how you work with us as an outside partner versus your internal HROD team?
Right. So I think that, when you follow the leadership training, Henry Ford has a very rich leadership. People can play on that. Cindy has done some leadership training with, our team and the broader team. I think I'd make 2 points here. It's not fair to, just like Vicki will ask me sometime to be the leader and be the member of the team one, and really concentrate. We also, Mark is part of my team as an HR. I believe the HR person needs to sit on my executive team, not just be called in when I need help from HR. So to be fair to Mark needs to be part of team one and not be the HR leader during these exercises. So it allows him to play that role. But then what it does is, as we go in the next slide, it'll show a timeline. But between that timeline is work that we've done that we said we'd be doing outside these sessions that Mark and Cindy or other assets within the Henry Ford will help us continue to do that work, so that it's an ongoing thing. So I think it really is a complementary. But I also do think there's a safety bringing in you and Vicki into. We're not talking to the Henry Ford HR. We're not talking about our dirty laundry with them. We really have a safe place to be totally vulnerable. So I really do think it's complementary.
Right. And speaking of that, let's get into this timeline. I think it's a good time for that. So we laid this out as how things unfolded, some major milestone items. There's obviously some individual coaching and dyad items that didn't show up on this. So can you speak a little bit to kind of how this all unfolded?
Yeah, so I'll just make a quick introductory and let Vicki jump in. I mean, be true to my word, you don't see one dot every year. You see multiple dots. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But you also see that this is ongoing. And if we put it the next 10 years, if I had the good fortune of leading this organization, I would continue. There would be just as many dots in at times, maybe more, because the external environment changes, something changes with the team. But this really does demonstrate that the team expects this now, and they come prepared. And Vicki probably has a great quote that she will use sometime about some exercise she asked us to do that I think I said was dumb. But the reality of it is it teaches us to be vulnerable. And so this is just being true to my word. This is something even in our hardest time when we're cutting back, we budget for, we spend time on it. So Vicki, I'll turn over to you more about the dots.
Sure, thanks. And I'll touch on that comment as well. So you can see here, I'm not going to go through every bullet, but it shows you the transition, or the evolution is probably a better word, from 2020 till current. And obviously the arrow goes out because we will continue to work together with the team. We just recently had a leadership team retreat, which was great, and focused on some of the same themes that we continue to bring through. So we, as you can see here, the first beginning ones, we talked about the foundation of work of leaders and 5 behaviors. These were all virtual sessions. So this is when everybody else, well, a lot of others, I should say, stopped their leadership and team development. Mike said, no, can you just redo it somehow and make it virtual? And we said, absolutely. So we started with the foundation of work of leaders and 5 behaviors, and then we worked through additional kind of team development, team learning opportunities in the areas of productive conflict, leading in a matrix environment, change leadership, just kind of to name a few. And then once we were able to get back in person, we participated in these custom designed retreats that Mike and I would talk about up front. Sometimes I would talk with other team members to really tailor, and that includes actually, by the way, a discussion with Mark every time to truly understand what is he seeing. And he appreciates the fact that he gets to be a team member and somebody else does kind of that heavy lifting in the retreat. So it works out really well between us. And so we went into those in-person custom designed retreats, and we focused on a variety of team needs, such as identifying key leadership behaviors for the team, leading with energy and resilience, we heard a little bit about, delegating and developing the next tier of leaders, fostering a strong team culture, being more grounded, conscious leaders. So these are all kind of things that they may not have been a standalone session, but they're integrated in now the retreats that we are able to integrate kind of all the needs at the same time. I should also say that what's important too is not only that we weave the continuing themes of building vulnerability-based trust and healthy and productive conflict. These are all woven into everything that you see here, even though they're not identified individually. We also identified real-time business issues. So in our offsites, we not only talk about the soft stuff, if you will, we talk about the hard stuff. So we integrate in actual activities of real life business issues. And what that's designed to do is work through the issues that need to be worked through, using those muscles that we have formed and are now building and making sure. So you're using both at the same time. One is active and one should be just starting to become habit. And so that's what we do in some of those offsites. While this continuum on the slide shows a linear team development process, it's certainly not linear. I didn't know what other shape to make it, but I just thought we would just explain a little bit. if you think about it, we built the foundation, we continuously add to that foundation. It, like I said, they challenge me in coming up with some new content that's going to be valuable for them, because we layer that into the retreats. We have some content, we have some working through real issues, we have some vulnerability, we have a whole variety of things worked in there. And they challenge me every time of coming up with content that I think they will find valuable and something that they can use, not just put in a desk after the session is over. And so we use those skills effectively to continue to work together as a team and produce amazing results.
One dot I would highlight too, that we didn't, and it didn't come till 2023, is we brought the ELT and the VP team together for a half-day workshop. And it wasn't until June of 2023 that we said, let's bring this group together and talk about some of the same personality behavior stuff that we did at the beginning of the program. And I think that is a great practice, that the senior team kind of spends time together first to understand their place and point of view before they start to bring in the next level in the organization. Maybe that could have happened earlier if we weren't in those COVID years. I'm not quite sure, but I just kind of highlight that was the one session where we started to bring in the next level. But even within this, each person is leaving those sessions and behaving differently with their team. So for some places, it'll even spawn team efforts and initiatives within each of the functional teams in concert with what's working on with the senior team.
Yeah, I'd make two comments there, Steve. One, I agree with you 100%. Before the existing team, there was a lot of chatter below the executive team that the executive team was not aligned. And they would take off and they go. And then they saw this evolution of this team over the last 3-4 years. And they're like, wow, they all like each other. They get along. They're talking the same way. Like, well, we've been working with this team coach. We've been doing these DISC surveys. We've been doing this. And it was a great time actually to lead it to our VPs, because there was this energy that they actually saw the transformation of the executive team through this process. The second point I would make is, you talked a little bit about a nice to have earlier in this conversation. I will tell you that if you're not emotionally exhausted at the end of Vicki's session, we didn't do the work. Even though we had it in a speakeasy and a fun, and we may have ended the day with a cocktail, the reality of it is most of us feel drained at the end of the day because of the level of vulnerability, and we take that vulnerability to do some work to actually solve critical business decisions we're looking at that time. And I think if you go to the next slide, I think it really speaks to that, because we weren't good at the 5 trust things. We've got this down. This is like table stakes of any good leadership team. We said, wait, we have all this and we're an all-grade team, but how do we take this to the next level? What's the next level of core leadership behaviors we expect of this team? And it was, really leading with courage and resilience. I mean, we were coming through tough times, pandemic. It wasn't a time to retreat. It was a time to really realize what we were doing. Again, during the pandemic, we are leading a strategic plan. Then we had the post-pandemic, pent-up demand, financial pressures, but we demanded ourselves to be innovative. We weren't growing. I mean, as much as we were winning accolades and consumer experience and net promoter scores and all that, but we weren't growing. So he said, time, what is required of this team to lead with a growth mindset? We saw a little slide back, and Vicki will show this on the next slide, of our conflict. How do we communicate? How are we doing productive conflict? How are we really getting in that? And we continue to hold each other accountable. So I really do think that, Vicki in the workshop will take these things and say, okay, you aren't growing. So what are you guys going to do about it? And we're going to do it here and have constructive conflict. And I'm going to be part of this process. Vicki, I don't know if you want to make comments about this slide as well.
So this is just another example of an evolution. So some leaders may have said, hey, we did the 5 behaviors. Let's just recheck our scores with that. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because leadership development, team development is sometimes feels fuzzy. Like, how do you gauge progress? How do you know that you are having success? What does that look like? We bring those into all of our discussions in our retreats. And so it felt like an evolutionary next level once we had already gone through the 5 behaviors and looked through those. We identified, and we started with actually 15 core leadership behaviors. And some of them were they crossed over with 5 behaviors, and we had those discussions about how critical they are and that they need to be talked about even twice. And so they would fit into the core leadership behaviors, and they would fit into 5 behaviors until they became table stakes, until those 5 behaviors were what we just naturally do on an everyday level. How do we take it to the next level? And so we started with 15. We narrowed it down, I think, to 12. And then we brought it down even further to say, what are the ones that we could ramble off that we know are the ones that we need to keep focus on? And these may change over time and evolve as well. And so they're just part of that same core foundation that gets brought in and revisited as we go through our evolution of the team development.
So in our last 5 minutes, let's show the results and kind of close with some of our lessons learned and observations that maybe we haven't covered yet. Proud to share this slide next.
I'll talk fast on this, just so we did promise time for Q&A in case people have them. So we did the recheck, if you will, the progress pulse check of the 5 behaviors about 3 years later. And at first I saw this and thought, I don't think I've ever seen an all green result before. And that develops a whole new set of challenges for me as their team coach, right? So some teams may say, yep, we made it. This is what we wanted to achieve. We were yellow and green. We wanted to hit all green. We're all green. Call it a day. And neither of us said that. I wasn't about to let them kind of call it a day. And Mike and the rest of the team wasn't ready to call it a day. And so even though these results look great, and very few teams, and I think they're my only team that I see this all green with, may say, we've done it, we've achieved it, and we don't. So we dig deeper into all of these areas continuously. We keep revisiting, we keep going deeper below the surface on all of them. Mike mentioned an activity that I will bring into every offsite retreat, and I start the day with it, and it'll be some form of vulnerability-based trust activity. And I know when I send the assignment out pre-retreat, the whole team probably does a sigh, because being vulnerable is not their favorite thing to do. It's nobody's favorite thing to do, especially with the people you work with. And so I force it. And afterwards, even though one activity that was a little over a year ago, I brought forth, it's one of my favorites. And Mike started his report out, if you will, or story. I guess they were stories. And so Mike started by saying, when I first introduced this activity, he thought it was dumb. And he didn't tell me that, by the way. And then he realized as he went through it that it really was an epiphany moment for him, that it was one of the best activities he's ever done. And I heard very similar from the team that when they got the assignment, they didn't love me for it. But when it came through as the result, and I've done that activity with other teams as well, they've said, and sometimes it's a 2-day retreat, and they've said that's the best part of the whole retreat. And so while people don't love being vulnerable, they're not going to do it on their own. It's actually really worthwhile once I kind of force them to do it.
Well, and we've seen time and again that these behaviors that show up on this green slide turn into measurable business results. So the organization has an employee engagement survey, and our survey scores go up. They have more people that have been promoted. We have 6 executive members that are now in the high potential category that weren't there before. The organization has won awards because they're operating in concert with each other at lower levels in the organization. They're more, connected to the customer, to the mission, to the vision, to the brand. I mean, we could go on and on about this and a whole bunch of other things. We didn't even talk about succession planning and how team development could, help that outside of traditional training activities. But just to say that there are good business results that come from this work. And for those of you that follow within the HR community, we also applied for and won a best practice in team development award for Brandon Hall for this program. So it was nationally recognized in its design and outcomes as well. I have been answering a couple of questions, by the way, in the chat as it's been coming in. So we have covered many of those. But in our last couple minutes, I just wanted to see if you wanted to sum up. Is there any other takeaways? This was kind of our list to say, if we didn't cover these, let's make sure we leave them at the end and make sure we've highlighted them through our dialogue today. Any last comments in our last couple minutes?
No, I would just say that, for any leader who's looking to drive performance, culture, well-being, and health of your team, I don't know how you do it without practicing, without bringing in someone. And I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't be the leader and a member. I couldn't create the tension in the room that Vicki can create, and remain unscathed. So I think that this is fulfilling and is confident for me to grow my sea legs as a CEO, as it is, I believe, for team functioning.
Wonderful. Well, we could talk another hour, as usually happens with these webinars, because they're really deep, meaningful subjects. But I want to thank you both. I'm also putting on the screen, for those of you that like these topics and want to dig deeper into individual coaching, our next webinar is going to be a panel of Dion Leadership coaches to talk more about what happens in individual executive coaching sessions. So we'll put that link in, hopefully in the chat, but also when we send the replay out to you as well. If you can join that on July 16th, that's always on a Tuesday at 11 o'clock. That would be great. Mike, Vicki, thank you so much. This hour flew by. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful for our community, those that could attend and those that'll watch the replay. And looking forward to seeing what great things your team and HAP has to offer in the future.
Well, thanks for letting me share this hour with you and Vicki.
Thanks. I hope you have a great rest of your week, both of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.